Right. Hello, everybody. Welcome to today's webinar. Today we are kicking off a three-part series that's going to focus on improving safety for bicyclists. This Designing for Bicyclist Safety webinar series is based on a brand new training course that was developed by the Federal Highway Administration, which is intended to cover the fundamentals of designing streets and intersections to improve safety for bicyclists, how to look at crash data, and make priorities about where safety improvements can be made. So we're very excited that you all are here to experience this with us. We've kind of taken the training course and boiled it down into these three parts. And today's episode is really going to set the stage for the series. We're going to talk about how we consider bicyclists within the context of the larger transportation system. And we'll try to understand some of the unique needs of different types of bicyclists. Our panelists will share some information about how you can go about analyzing various data sources to better understand and diagnose safety problems. And then setting up for the second and third parts of the series where we'll really get into more specifics about particular design solutions that can improve safety for bicyclists both along the roadway and then at intersections and other crossing locations. This webinar series is supported by the Federal Highway Administration's Office of Safety through a program that provides training and technical assistance to the FHWA designated pedestrian and bicyclist focused cities and states around the country, really trying to target resources toward those cities and states that are experiencing problems with pedestrians and bicycle safety and identifying strategies and solutions to address those problems. My name is Dan Jaleen. We're here with the UNC Highway Safety Research Center, and I'll be facilitating the webinar today. Before we get much further, I'd like to introduce you to each of our panelists that are joining us today. First, we'll hear from Brooke Struve, who is a safety and geometric design engineer with the Federal Highway Administration's Resource Center. Brooke led the development of this course, the Designing for Bicyclist Safety training course, and has been leading these trainings in cities around the country. Michael Sinecki is a project manager for Lee Engineering. He specializes in pedestrian and bicycle safety and spent 26 years with the Phoenix, Arizona Transportation Department. Mike has a wealth of experience in developing and implementing safety countermeasures, and we're glad to have him here with us today. We're also joined by Peter Lagerwey, who is a senior planner with Tool Design Group. Peter spent more than 30 years managing pedestrian and bicycle projects and programs, many of them with the city of Seattle. Brooke, Mike, and Peter collectively have led dozens of training courses around the country to assist agencies in improving safety for non-motorized road users, and we're very lucky to have them joining us today to lead us through this material. Before we get much further, I would like to talk through just a few housekeeping items. Attendees, if you can hear me, I'd like to ask if you could please click the hand icon that's located in the upper right-hand corner of your screen, which will let me know that you can hear me and that we are coming through loud and clear. So I'll just wait and see if I can see those hands going up. And I sure can. Thank you very much for doing that, and very excited to have so many of you joining us today to go through this material. If for whatever reason during the webinar your computer freezes, ask you to please just reload the website and log back into the program. You should be able to just rejoin the session. I'll note that that as attendees you won't have the ability to speak during the webinar, although you will have the ability to submit questions and comments to us using the chat function. Feel free to ask questions at any time during the webinar. We're going to be holding about 20 to 30 minutes for a discussion session with our presenters after the presentations are finished today. We will be posting, and actually already have posted, the presentation slides from today's webinar on our webinar archive page. We'll be following that up with a posting of the recording of this session on the PBIC website. So you will be able to look back at anything you missed today. The presentation slides, like I mentioned, are available now, and the video archive should be available within about a day or so. You can access that information at pedbikeinfo.org/webinars. Later today, you're going to be receiving a follow-up email from the UNC Highway Safety Research Center with a link that's going to allow you to generate a certificate of attendance for the webinar. It's important to know that if you're attending the webinar with multiple attendees at your site, we'll want to make sure that you forward this message to each of them so that they can also generate a certificate of attendance. The email will also contain a link to the website where we've already posted the slide materials and we'll be posting the recording from today's webinar. The webinar has been submitted to the American Planning Association to be considered for 1.5 CM credits. I'd encourage you to please check the online AICP event calendar for more information about that. Just talk briefly about some of the upcoming webinars we have and some of the archive material we have posted. We do archive and record all of our webinars, and in particular, I draw your attention to the second and third parts of this webinar series that are coming up on April 17th to 27th, respectively. So if you're not already registered for those, I encourage you to do so. You can find more information about PBIC webinars, follow us, and track more information about what we offer at these links here below on the slide. Before we move on, I did want to make a quick plug. Next month, coming up next month, is National Bike to School Day. I'm not sure how many people out there celebrate this. With the topic we're going to be covering today, I thought it would be very appropriate to talk about this and mention that you have the ability, if you're interested, to host National Bike to School Day celebration on May 10th. So if you're interested in doing this or interested in learning more about what it's all about, you can visit walkbiketoschool.org. Many of you may be familiar with National Walk to School Day or International Walk to School Day, and so this is a nice event to celebrate bicycling as well. So that might be something you're interested in considering. I am going to take one poll of the audience before we move on and get into our feature presentations today. If you wouldn't mind, take a look at the poll on your screen and let us know about how many people are attending from your location. This just really helps us understand how many people are attending the webinar today. It may be just you at your computer, or you may be joined by a few colleagues, or maybe even a larger group. So if you can provide this information to us, we would really appreciate it. This will help us really understand how people are attending our webinars. So I'll leave this open for about 10 more seconds, and then we'll go ahead and move on with our presentation. Okay, just a few more seconds on the poll. If you haven't voted yet, please do that. We'll go ahead and close it up. Thank you very much for providing that feedback, everybody. We do appreciate it. I'm going to not waste any more time and turn things right over to Brooke Struve and the rest of our panelists to move along with this presentation. So Brooke, as soon as you see the alert come through, if you want to take over the screen, we're ready to go.
All right, let me just bring up my presentation.
Okay, perfect.
Okay. As Dan mentioned, this is the first in a series of 3 webinars that we're presenting that is drawing from the material in the workshop that we've developed. And we've delivered the workshop both in a 1- and 2-day format. And then I just want to give another brief introduction to you of who we are. I'm Brooke Struve, and I'm joined by Mike Sinecki and Peter Lagerwey. And you have our contact information here. And so if you download or the slide materials later, you will be able to reach us. But I think if you Googled any one of us, you might be able to find us as well. This course has been delivered to a number of locations through our pedestrian and bicyclist focused approach. And when we deliver it that way, we are able to deliver it at a very low or nominal cost to those locations. But that's not the only way we've been delivering this course. We can also deliver it to other locations besides just pedestrian bicycle focused cities and states. And we do that through NHI, and there is some expense, of course, a fee involved. And so if you are interested in arranging for a class in your location, you can contact Dan or me, Dan in particular if you're a focus city or state, and me if you're a focus city or state or not, and we can talk about getting something set up for you. An introductory note of caution or disclaimer: a lot of things are changing very quickly in terms of what we know about good design for bicyclists, what the appropriate traffic control devices are, and so forth. And so I just want to mention that anything you see in the materials today or anything you might see in materials you have sitting in your desk may already be outdated. And so I would advise you always to check for the latest and greatest information in terms of traffic control devices and design guidelines. And in this presentation, we'll point to a few of those resources that can help you in that process. So to start out, I want to talk about why why do we want to focus time and attention and resources on designing for bicyclists and their safety? So what are some of the opportunities? In a national survey of transportation, we found that 50% of trips are less than or equal to 3 miles. And that might be a distance that in some cases is too far to walk, but 3 miles is a very bikeable distance. More than 1/3 of U.S. adults say they would commute by bicycle if they felt that there were safe facilities available to them. And a final comment, 1 out of 11 U.S. households don't own an automobile. So that's about 9% of the households in the country, which means they're needing to find other means of transportation, whether it's bus, walking, or using a bicycle. And a bicycle is a very economical way to get around if economics are the reason they don't have a car. Something we want to be cautious of is thinking about the type of bicyclist we're designing for. We see the experienced and confident riders frequently on any type of roadway, and they'll navigate on streets. And while they navigate on streets, they might prefer having a separate bike lane or even an off-street facility, but the fact that one doesn't exist won't stop them from traveling on the roads. But they also will sometimes choose a busier road that's more direct or simpler to navigate, even if there is an off-street facility available. Those experienced and confident riders will be riding much faster at 25 miles per hour on a level and may be as fast as 45 miles per hour on a downgrade, and they will take longer trips. On the other hand, the casual, less confident rider may have some difficulty on the road. They're going to prefer those off-street facilities or facilities that have some separation between them and traffic or on very low volume streets. And they may be choosing to ride on the sidewalk. They may take a longer trip if it's going to help them avoid uncomfortable situations. And they're traveling at a much slower speed. But the key I want to make here is those casual and less confident riders, their trip lengths are going to be 1 to 5 miles in length. So you think about the percentage of trips in our country that are 3 miles or less. Our casual and less confident rider could be making a choice to ride their bike instead of getting in a car to travel to the corner grocery or somewhere else. A key message I wanted to share with this information here, this came from some surveys where people were asked why they biked, and they weren't able to select multiple reasons. They picked one reason. Recreation did come out on top, and very often the question comes up, why are we putting transportation funding and resources towards a recreational purpose? But I would ask you this, have you ever gone cruising or for a Sunday drive or for a road trip just for the enjoyment of being out on the road? Recreation is not exclusive to bicycling. There's a lot of transportation that we do for recreational purposes. So that shouldn't be something that eliminates biking as a transportation possibility. But also sometimes there's dual purposes. Someone might say that they're biking to exercise, but while they're biking to exercise, they're getting themselves to and from work or they're running an errand. You know, there's multiple reasons that people get on bikes. And just because recreation is very often the perceived reason for biking, it doesn't mean that it's not transportation related. There's some characteristics of bicyclists of which we should be aware. First of all, you know, they have preferences just like all of us. And when we get on the road, we want to feel safe and secure. They're going to prefer lower speed traffic, lower volume traffic, and that's part of that safety and security. And certainly a lower percentage of trucks in that traffic when they're close to it. And fewer lanes because it makes intersections less difficult and smaller distances to get across. In terms of behavior, very often they're accused of violating traffic control. But I would ask all of you to consider what speed did you drive when you came into the office today, or the last time you were in your car. Were you driving under the speed limit, or were you driving a little faster? Have you ever rolled through a stop sign in your car? Bicyclists are not the only ones who tend to violate traffic control, and sometimes there's a reason for the traffic control violations. Sometimes we do things with our infrastructure that are encouraging violations. And so if we see areas where there's a lot of violations, we should be asking ourselves first, what have we done with the traffic control of the infrastructure that might be prompting that behavior? Mike and Peter, I don't know if you want to add any thoughts to that subject.
Yeah, this is Pete. I would just, this is a really good list, and I would just expand a little bit on speed, because when I look at different crash rates around the country, and I look at what's the common denominator of communities that have lower crash rates, it's the ones who really figure out how to manage the speed, especially where there's a lot of pedestrians and bicyclists. So yeah, a very good list.
Thanks, Peter. Some other behaviors of bicyclists, they're of course going to be using pedal power, so they're going to be slow on uphill or extended grades, and they're going to be faster on downhills and maybe have more difficulty braking. They don't have power brakes, they're using their fingers. Mike, did I hear you getting ready to jump in?
No.
Brooke, Dan, I was gonna add something there. The same conversation about, we've gotten a few comments so far, really helpful comments to think about, as sort of people who are in the, as practitioners or researchers, we're kind of looking at these various categories of bicyclists. You mentioned the confident bicyclist, or the less casual or less confident bicyclist. And I think the point to remember is that there aren't really these distinct pools of bicyclists, but really, everyone exists on a spectrum in terms of what comfort levels and what their preferences are. And I think what we have to think about are, how can we optimize those choices and make those decisions available, no matter what someone's comfort level is. And so I think, especially if you're in a position where you're, working on messaging to talk about different groups of bicyclists, it's important the language you use, certainly. And I think the point that you're making is very good, that, you've got to think of each individual person's preferences and what they're comfortable with and what they're not. And it was pointed out in the comments that even some less confident bicyclists who want to travel at lower speeds may actually prefer wider roads with more lanes to allow more distance for vehicles to pass them, even though we always think in the traffic engineering and planning world that maybe those are faster roads that are more hazardous. So each person, I think, has their own kind of unique perspective on these issues.
And I was going to jump in and just add that in terms of behavior, it's good to start young bicyclists out knowing that giving them the information to know the rules of the road, to make it just feel normal to wear a helmet, like it's normal to wear a safety belt when you're riding in a car, to know that they have to stop at stop signs, yield the right of way to pedestrians if on the sidewalk, and pay attention to the rules of the road. So if they learn that early, those are lifelong skills they'll have later on in life.
Absolutely. And I want to add on to something that Dan said in terms of messaging. I had a recent conversation with someone who'd been working along a series of projects on a corridor. And one of the projects for adding bike lanes was in an older established neighborhood. It had some younger families, but a number of older residents living in the community. And those older residents had more time available and were more politically connected. And so when they came to the community with the message, we're going to add bike lanes, these residents who were, in their 80s or 70s and were not active bicyclists themselves, didn't really see a need or value to that. It was not something that resonated with them in terms of a message. Now, if the message perhaps had been something about an illustration showing a resident at their mailbox talking to a parent standing on the sidewalk with their 10-year-old on a bike in the adjacent bike lane, it might have had a different message in terms of a connected community, livability, and so forth. And so messaging is important because there is a certain portion of our population that is not interested in bicycling for themselves, but there may be ancillary benefits to them as well. In terms of our crash statistics nationally, our most recent FARS data from 2015 says we had 818 bicyclists killed across the country, and we estimate that there were 45,000 injured. And while these numbers are low in comparison to the overall highway crash numbers that we have, cyclists accounted for 2.3% of all traffic fatalities, but they only make up 1% of all trips. And when you think of the average length of a bicyclist trip, it's certainly going to be a significantly fewer vehicle miles traveled by bicyclists than compared to automobiles. So they are overrepresented in our crash statistics. Mike, would you like to talk about biking on the sidewalks? Mike, are you muted?
There I go. I was muted. Many people think that riding on the sidewalk is the safest place to ride, but when we looked at over the 26 years I was with Phoenix, when we looked at our high crash sites, most of them involved bicyclists riding on the sidewalks, and most of it was the unexpected direction, some people would call it the wrong way direction on the sidewalk. Most communities allow riding on the sidewalks. Some communities prohibit it, and some communities restrict it to riding in the same direction in traffic. But motorists, many times when they're pulling out of driveways, are looking to their left and not expecting someone coming at them from the right at a rapid speed. And that's where the crashes occur. And many studies have shown that crash rates are typically higher on the sidewalk than if they're in the street, where they're more expected. And of course, when they're in the street, they follow the rules of the road, and they're supposed to be riding in the same direction.
I'll jump in there too. My good points on the risk of sort of that sidewalk riding. I think one other side of that issue when you see maybe crashes that involve bicyclists riding on the sidewalk is the focus immediately will go to the bicyclist riding on the sidewalk as sort of the reason why that person was struck. But often don't get to the level of kind of rethinking the whole situation and think, well, why was the bicyclist riding on the sidewalk in the first place? Say it wasn't legal, but they still were. There's questions then to be asked about, well, is the roadway comfortable enough to really support bicycling on the road? There's likely a reason why that person was there. And the same can be said for things like riding in the wrong direction. That sometimes can be difficult to merge all the way across traffic to capture use the bike lane that's on the other side. So maybe people will ride in the wrong direction. So one challenge would be for us the folks who were responsible for making these improvements is to rethink, well, yes, this was the behavior we saw, but is it really all that we could do? Do we build the roadway and design the roadway in the right way to make that the correct behavior comfortable and safe and convenient for the person? And so oftentimes, those need to happen hand in hand, I would say.
This is Pete. I'm going to jump in on this one too. The other thing I think is on any facility, including sidewalks, you always want to look at what's the design speed. And obviously, sidewalks have a design speed quite often, depending on a variety of things, under 5 miles an hour. And so one of the things too think about sidewalk bike riding is its relationship to speed, its design speed, and obstructions, visibility, sight triangles, that kind of thing as well. And so I think a lot of times, at least when I used to look at crash data, and I think the point is really well taken, why a person is on the sidewalk. And then the other thing I always look at again is speed and the relationship of either speed of the motor vehicle, speed of the cyclist, and then sort of the design speed of the facility.
Thank you. So in terms of overall trends, in the last 10 years, total traffic fatalities have been increasing or decreasing significantly, while we're still seeing an overall increase in bicycle fatalities by comparison. And then similarly, traffic injuries are decreasing, but we're seeing an increase in bicyclist injuries. And something to remember with our data collection is we don't necessarily get good injury records on bicyclists because there may not be a crash report per se.
Yeah, Brooke, I'm sorry, I'll jump in. If you can go back one slide, we had a question there that I'll pose to maybe you and Pete and Mike. And the common question when you see those bicyclist injuries and fatalities on the rise, the question becomes, well, is bicycling on the rise as well? Is that what's leading to this? And from my perspective, I don't think we have a great answer to that question, but I'm interested in what you all have to say and what you respond to if bicyclist fatalities are on the rise. What's maybe the culprit, or what's the reasoning?
This is Mike Sanecki, and I know that in our region, in our areas, we are seeing an increase in bicycling. We're seeing an increase in bicycling facilities that are making it safer to bicycle, but just there's more riders out in the road. But we still have the big problem with drivers not expecting them, and the issue with driver speeds. We have very high speeds in this part of the country.
Yeah,
Peter,
this is Pete.
Go ahead, Peter.
Okay. Yeah, this is Pete. I would agree. We don't really have a good handle on this, but I think we have a pretty good handle on it on a spot basis in some cities around the country, and with people using various apps for their smartphones, and we're getting a better sense now of exposure. And so when you start looking at exposure, and we're getting better numbers in terms of the number of trips, in those communities where we've got good data and there's a lot of bicyclists, it's certainly some good news. It appears that as the biking number of bike trips goes up, the rates are actually going down. And it gets back to the old question when you ask somebody who's hit a bicyclist or a pedestrian for that matter, you talk to a motorist and they're always going to say, I didn't see the person, almost always. And usually, a lot of times I think that's true, because when you're visually scanning, if you're not expecting to see a bicyclist, and typically they're not there, then you won't see them. And again, we need a lot more study in this area, but by all appearances, it seems that once the bicycling goes up, and there's pretty much always a bicycle on the street someplace, it becomes part of that visual scan, and indeed we're seeing the numbers in terms of rates start to go down in some of those areas. So that's not a real good answer to the bigger picture question, but I think the micro trends in communities that have a lot of bicycling are certainly looking optimistic.
Yeah, and I'll just make one more comment on the point you made, Brooke, that you can't overstate enough how the issue of bicycle crashes and the crash data we're looking at is not indicative of the full picture. And we know that bicycle crashes are underreported largely in a lot of places based on a variety of factors, but you can think of a number of crashes that may occur that maybe it's a single crash with just the bicyclist, or maybe there's not at the time the person feels the need to call for a crash report, or for whatever reason. We're not seeing the full picture, and I think we need to keep that in mind when we're doing things like data analysis, which we'll talk about in a minute.
And I think that distracted driving continues to be a problem. And unfortunately, I've even photographed a few instances recently of distracted bicycling, where someone was talking on the phone while riding, and even someone was dialing a phone while riding. A pretty neat trick to do, and try to maintain an awareness of all the things that are around you.
Well, and I will admit that during one of our workshops recently, I was biking and photographing and managed to fall off my bike. So, there's all sorts of bicycle distractions that can happen. But another thing I'll mention too is sometimes as we're responding to the desire for bicycling facilities, maybe we've got a partially implemented network and we haven't addressed the transitions very well, or we haven't fully treated the intersections. And so we've made an incremental improvement that maybe is encouraging more biking, but then we haven't done our job as diligently as we should and left them in some riskier situations. So, there's a combination of things I think that are contributing to this. This is a study, this is results from a study that was done in the city of Portland, where they questioned their residents about their feelings about biking. And I think we can learn some things about this that we might be able to translate into our discussion of why we want to do a better job of providing comfortable bicycling facilities. What they found in Portland was about 1% of their population was that strong and fearless rider who will be out there regardless of the conditions or the amount of infrastructure that's available to them. And then there's about 6% of the population that's enthusiastic and confident about riding, and I would presume that they are out there riding as well, but maybe not as in all situations and everywhere as would the strong and fearless rider. Then you have about 60% of the population that is interested and concerned. And I would infer from that that most of those people aren't riding on a regular basis, or they're only riding if there's a shared use path or something that's keeping them more separate from traffic. And that's where I see we have a great opportunity, because if we have a network of facilities that will feel safe to that interested but concerned rider, then we're providing a network that's available to a much wider population. And so when we're building facilities and all we see out there are those strong and fearless rider, the spandex warriors, we might be asking ourselves, did we build the right type of facility to reach that larger piece of the population? Peter, you live in this region of the country. Do you want to add anything?
Sure. No, I just think this graphic's great, and I think, you know, subsequent studies have validated this pretty closely in terms of percentages. And when you talk to the interested but concerned, the messaging we always hear is that their biggest concern is fear of motor vehicle traffic. And I think if you're looking at what's happening nationally in terms of sort of responding to that concern is really that we're looking at, you know, more separation and some of the new facilities you alluded to when we started the webinar, and certainly also looking at, you know, ways to, you know, manage speeds, especially at intersections where a lot of cyclists, of course, are hit. And so, yeah, I think focusing on this target audience is exactly what we need to be doing in terms of both making bicycling safer and growing the number of trips.
And I'll cut in here too, because there's a great comment that was just posted that I'd like to read, and it's related to the fact that we probably, as cities or as agencies, we probably build a lot of facilities that are that reach that strong and fearless crowd, a lot of streets that are comfortable for the strong and fearless crowd, because a lot of times they might be the ones at the meetings speaking most loudly about what they want to see or what changes they want to make. And I think that fact is probably going to vary from place to place, but it's an important point that you can't just prioritize the things that you hear people saying, or you can't just do things in, for example, the neighborhoods where those people are attending the meetings. You've got to think broadly about and really go out and find out who are the bicyclists in our community and what do they want. I think that's a great point.
And not just the bicyclists that are currently biking, but those who might choose to bike. And are there destinations and origins and trip generators that would lend themselves well to biking? There's a metric that was developed by the Mineta Transportation Institute. They used it to evaluate all of the roadways in San Jose, California in terms of levels of traffic stress. And it's 4 criteria. Level of traffic stress 1 would be a facility that's suitable for almost everyone. Level of traffic stress 2 is suitable for most adult bicyclists. Level of traffic stress 3, we're amping up the stress. It's going to be a less comfortable facility. And then level of traffic stress 4 is going to be only suitable for that strong and fearless rider. And here's a little more detail on what goes into those levels of traffic stress. On the one end, the level of traffic stress 1, you might be physically separated from traffic, or it's very low volume, slow speed traffic, and it's going to be comfortable for children. On the other end of the spectrum, level traffic stress 4, you might not have anything specific for bicyclists, higher traffic speeds, and you'll only see those spandex warriors out there. But level traffic stress 3, this is what is typical of most bicycle facilities in the U.S. Bike lanes next to a 35-mile-an-hour travel lane. And then when you think about what is going to be comfortable for most adults, when you think about that 60% of the population that is interested but concerned, that's going to be a facility that's designed for a level of traffic stress 2. And so, when we have bike facilities that are out there that people aren't using, we should be asking ourselves, well, who did we build this bike facility for? Is it the enthusiastic and confident and strong and fearless riders, or did we build something that was going to be comfortable for most people? This is a quote from the AASHTO Guide for Development of Bicycle Facilities, and I will mention that this guide is undergoing an update. There's a draft version that's being reviewed, and hopefully in the next year or so it will be publicly available. But the most recent version, it says, in order for the casual, less confident rider to regularly choose bicycling as a mode of transportation, a physical network of visible, convenient, and well-designed bicycle facilities is needed. And I'd like to emphasize that it needs to be a network, because you can have one corridor with a great bike facility, but if it doesn't connect to anything, how are you going to get to or from it? Unless you live on that corridor and you're going to someplace on that corridor, it's not going to be useful. And so here, we have an example of a street network in a community. And in the residential streets, you might not need to have anything in particular for that to be a comfortable biking facility. But when you start looking at collectors and arterials, have they become barriers to getting to the adjacent neighborhood, or are they so uncomfortable that you can't get across town to a place of employment or a shopping center or a school because you're fearful of riding along that corridor, or there's no corridors that connect up that are comfortable? Mike, you had an experience with Phoenix's bike master plan, and would you like to share that?
Yeah, when our number one concern for the bike master plan that we're doing was the connections, the connectivity. We had a lot of nice bike facilities, but if they don't connect into a full network, as Brooke had said earlier, people aren't out there riding it. And we have a number of barriers that we have here that we're trying to overcome, and some of the barriers are freeways. We have a great canal system, which is great riding along, but we need to have crossings every once in a while. And we need to work with the adjacent communities to make sure they know that this is going to be for their benefit, because, say the bridge is going across the freeways or across the canals, people are concerned that they don't want those other people who they consider as less desirable coming into their neighborhood but working with the police and assuring the people that they are going to remain secure, and this is going to be for the benefit of the entire community, is a helpful way to get around those. And making sure, if you're going to have meetings to talk about connectivity and getting across certain barriers, that the police who come are well trained and well informed about what the issues are, so that they can respond appropriately and accordingly.
This is Pete. If I could just add on to what Mike said, and totally agree on the network. One of the things that I'm finding is again, with a lot of cyclists, they're just might never feel comfortable on some of the arterial streets. And so on the residential streets, we're seeing a lot of interest in bicycle boulevards, neighborhood greenways. A lot of different words are used, but they're essentially the same. And of course, the challenge is every half mile or quarter mile, you're going to come to an arterial street that you're going to need to cross. And so a lot of the new kind of design guidance and thinking is related, like the rapid flash beacon or hawk or whatever, is related to getting cyclists and pedestrians across arterial streets when it's part of a neighborhood greenway or bike boulevard system. And so that becomes more important, and I think we're going to see a lot more work in that area soon. And then just to pick up on, Mike, you mentioned bridges. A lot of our bridges are reaching a point where they need major rehabilitation or to be replaced. A lot of them were built, in the 50s, 60s, into the 70s, and we're at that point. And so it's really an opportunity to get better access, because the network doesn't work if the bridges don't work. And so I know when I work with different communities, different advocacy groups, I always tell them there's more than likely half a dozen bridges in your area that are in some phase of being redone, if not replaced, and really focus your energy there in terms of a long-term investment in the network.
That is true. There's one freeway near my house that was built either in the early 50s or, the late 50s or early 60s. when no population was anywhere near this area. You have to realize when you're building a bridge, you're not building it for the next 5 or 10 or 20 years. You may be building it for a half century. And what development could occur out there, and what modes do you have to accommodate? You should really try to look at the long distance future, not just a 20-year planning horizon.
Absolutely. And I'll also add that not every corridor needs to be all things to all people. You might want to focus your attention on commuters and freight on one corridor, but make sure there's a nearby parallel corridor where you can be more pedestrian and bicyclist focused. And that way you get that overall network that satisfies everyone's needs, but is still accommodating everyone. So we're going to move into a discussion of some core safety concepts. We don't yet know everything that we'd like to know or have all the analysis tools perhaps that we'd like to have. And so it becomes very often a qualitative evaluation of our facilities, but there are some things that we do know or some areas where we can identify where those higher risks are and then be strategic and focus our attention on putting countermeasures and treatments that will address those higher risks. We've mentioned some of these things already. Certainly speed is going to be one of those factors. The higher the motor vehicle speed is, or the bicyclist speed for that matter, we're reducing reaction times. But also, the momentum of an impact is going to be higher. Number of lanes is going to contribute to the amount of traffic that's experienced for a bicyclist riding along the roadway, as well as the complexity and the size of intersections that have to be crossed. Visibility, I'm referring to, do the drivers see bicyclists? Do they know where to expect them? Are we calling attention to them? And are they predictable in what they're going to do and where they're going to be within the roadway? We've mentioned traffic volume and composition. A lot of high volume traffic or traffic with a lot of larger vehicles is going to be less comfortable. Anytime we have a conflict point, that's a risk of a crash. If the driver doesn't see or slow down for the bicyclist, or the bicyclist doesn't yield properly in the right place. The closer bicyclists are to moving traffic, the less comfortable a facility is going to be. Bike control, I'm referring there to a lot of things, which may include pavement condition, what sort of utilities you have in the bike lane, like manhole covers or utility cuts, but also things like transit tracks. Mike, you have some experience with transit tracks being a problem for bicyclists. Do you want to comment on that? Mike, are you muted?
Yeah, I'm muted again. There are more in-street streetcars being built, streetcar lines throughout the communities where the roadways are shared with other users. And the warnings for bicyclists of those in pavement conditions, and then just to let them know what can happen if a bicyclist rides on the rail and slides on that rail or gets caught in the flangeway. I'm not aware of any kind of a flangeway filler for a streetcar that is workable. So that the bicyclists are a sharer of the roadway, and they just have to be aware, and the designers have to be aware of how can they make this streetcar work and make the bicycling safe and continuous to provide those connections for the bicyclists.
Thank you, Mike. And other thing. Oh, yes, go ahead.
Sorry, I just wanted to jump in on one of these that the third one down, the safety factor of visibility. I wanted to maybe contrast that with how it often is brought up, in that you may see a situation where there was a crash and the comment back or the report or whatever will say, oh, the bicyclist was wearing reflective clothing or bright clothing or anything like that. Kind of putting the onus of blame on the cyclists themselves. But I challenge folks to think about visibility in terms of issues of lighting, which we'll talk about a bit on both the next two episodes. Is a very important issue. But there was a comment earlier, we'll maybe bring it up, is someone left a comment about people who ride, who may be coming to and from work late at night, things like that if you just go out and look at a roadway or consider a safety problem, you need to think about all these issues. And I think lighting is one that often gets lost in that. And Mike, you've done a lot of work in the lighting area. And one challenge would be to every time you look at a condition or a roadway or do an audit is to do that same audit in the nighttime as you do during the day and determine whether the lighting levels are sufficient, because visibility and conspicuity are certainly big issues for both pedestrians and certainly bicyclists.
Thank you, Dan. And then, a final thing is connectivity, that network that we mentioned. And sometimes it's part of our phasing, but we need to think in the short term, how are we going to deal with the transition because we don't have the whole network in place yet, but also, are we stranding someone somewhere on our network, and making sure that we've treated those connections appropriately. So here's just an example photo of what we might call a complete street. We have transit, we have biking, we have pedestrians, and just making sure that when we provide those bicycling facilities, we're providing something that's going to be comfortable to a wide range of users. This one might be a level of traffic stress 3 given the number of travel lanes and what I'm guessing the speed might be. So with a few extra enhancements, it might make it more comfortable to a larger range of bicyclists. Now I'd like to ask you to look at this photo. Can you identify any bicycle-specific features that are part of this roadway? As far as I can tell, there's no bike lane markings, there's no signing for bicyclists and so forth. But because it's a lower speed, lower volume roadway with a very friendly context, these bicyclists seem to be comfortable taking the lane and being on the roadway in mixed traffic. On this roadway in Las Vegas, it's very autofocused and makes for a very high-risk, uncomfortable type riding. And this road warrior is probably the only bicyclist you may see out there all day. And so we need to be thinking, to ourselves, are we going to provide a dedicated space on a street for our bicyclists, or are we going to identify streets that have a slower speed or where we can slow down traffic to make it more friendly for bicyclists to be in the roadway? And overall, instead of just thinking of bicyclists as something that we need to check the box at the end of the project and tack on something for them, we really should be asking ourselves, how do we integrate them into our overall design process and include them in our thinking? So let's talk about some of the design policies that we have and tools. Federal law says that we must consider bicycling facilities where appropriate in new construction and reconstruction, and we must consider having a contiguous route in our plans and projects. I'd ask you, what does consider mean? Does consider mean that I thought about it, it's not a good idea, I'm not going to do it? Or did you actually incorporate bicycling into your alternatives analysis and look at various schemes that might address this? We can maybe do better than just checking the box and decided, we can't do it. Very often there's a perception that FHWA and the Department of Transportation aren't going to allow for biking on the national highway system, or it's not a priority for us. But in 2010, Secretary Ray LaHood, who was the Secretary of the Department of Transportation at the time, came out with a policy that said that every agency, including the Department of Transportation, has a responsibility to improve conditions for walking and biking and integrate that into our transportation systems. And with that policy, there were some recommended actions. Considering bicycling as equal with other modes, ensuring that we have transportation choices for people of all ages and abilities, not just the road warriors, going beyond minimum design standards. And I'd like to make a comment about this here. If we have a corridor where we have the minimum sidewalk width, a minimum width for parking, a minimum travel lane width, and we've extended that all the way across the corridor, it makes it an uncomfortable facility for everyone. Sometimes we have to make compromises, but sometimes I think we need to balance that out. And so that might be a reason why you would choose to focus your biking corridor on one corridor, and you might focus your freight or transit or some other features on another corridor, so that you can do something a little bit more than the minimum. Or maybe if you have a minimum travel lane, you have a little bit wider buffer or something of that nature.
This is Pete. I just want to endorse that concept, and we refer to it as the multiple minimums. And when you get 3 or 4 minimums next to each other, at some point it breaks down.
It becomes, you're aggregating so many minimums that it makes it much more than just one minimum would be. Pete, or I'm sorry, Mike, what were you going to say?
Yeah, I wanted to say that I've come across some agencies that have a very high minimum for vehicle lane width, and sometimes going down lower will help encourage lower speeds by putting a narrower environment for that and allow more space for bicycling and sidewalks. So I think that sometimes the minimums are really as minimum as they should be for vehicles, but yet they'll go with the very minimums for the sidewalk and for the bicycling area.
That raises a good question. You know, who are we going to compromise the most? The people that are in an armored motor vehicle or the people that are on a two-wheeled bicycle? So we've talked about integrating bicycle accommodations on bridges. I don't think we need to say more about that here. We should be collecting data on bicycle trips to help inform our decision making on where to focus our attention. And then finally, we should be maintaining our bike facilities just like we maintain our roadway facilities. And something like a road diet or a resurfacing project is a great opportunity to ask ourselves, you know, have we used our pavement width to the best purpose, and can we rethink that? Have things changed over time that we can adjust the space available for bicyclists on the road? So how do we evaluate needs, and what information is going to be helpful in that process? Certainly data collection becomes important, and Peter, would you like to talk about data collection? I know you have some experience on that topic.
Sure. You know, obviously you want to, you know, look at your crash data and locate it on a map and those kinds of things. But one of the things I always caution communities is there's a real difference in how bicycle crash data aggregates than when you compare it, say, to motor vehicle crash data. Quite often, you don't have as many high crash locations. You have some, and you definitely want to give real serious attention to those. But if that's all you do, you probably are not going to get real changes in your overall crash statistics. And so one of the things that I found is just like what's mentioned here is a lot of times crashes occur along corridors and also in sort of certain neighborhood areas. And so looking at it holistically that way, I think, is really important. And then the other is to you know, just be really on top of the research. And we know, for example, that at intersections with certain characteristics, when you have concurrent movements, in other words, say a bike going straight and a left turn moving motor vehicle, in certain kinds of situations, those can have really high crash rates as well. And so looking ahead on some of this, it also starts to inform how we would prioritize where we put our resources, including the design of intersections. And we've talked a little bit about the movement to provide more separation for the more casual cyclist. But the second item on that list that I would just call attention to is moving towards fewer concurrent movements and more dedicated movements in some places where that really makes sense. And so that's also an outcome of looking at the crash data.
And this is Dan. Just a plug for, again, to think about when you're looking at crash data, Pete, as you said, like understanding that you're only seeing a piece of the picture. And some of the folks on the line, we got a couple of questions about, you know, what is the process for how that crash data gets all pulled together? Where do those come from? And really, I mean, and it varies by location, but there are different thresholds that are out there for when crash reports must be completed. Typically, there's either there's some level of injury that results from a crash, or there's some level of property damage that's assessed. And you can think, everyone can probably think of scenarios where bicycle crashes may occur, and if there's not an immediate injury apparent, or there's not that property damage element, that might not be reported. So you're automatically not seeing a huge number of these events that may otherwise, if you had them in your bank or in your database, may lead you to those locations where you need to prioritize. So certainly a risk to only look at crash data and not other.
This is Mike. No, go ahead. I was going to say too that we've had some incidences where police officers will code a bicycle crash or similar to a pedestrian crash and just says a single vehicle crash because there's only one vehicle involved. They miscode it, and so you'll miss some that way. Plus, there's a lot of bicycle crashes that don't involve vehicles, that don't find their ways into the crash databases. That people there needs to be a way to find out about these types of incidents. And going to the bicycling community is sometimes a way of data collection for some areas that they have areas of concern.
You know, since the issue of unreported crashes has come up, just add a comment too. In some of the surveys that I've seen where they ask people, you know, crashes they've had on a bicycle and when they went to an emergency room, I've seen up to 80% plus of crashes involving bicyclists that were serious enough that you had to go to emergency room did not involve a motor vehicle. And that doesn't mean they're the most serious ones, and it doesn't mean they're the fatalities, but certainly a lot of them. And then when you dig a little deeper, you find a lot of it is related to debris on the road, and it does go back to, you know, good design where you really deal with the drainage and don't let debris build on the road, and also just good design in terms of, again, on like trails and things, design speed and turning design speed, and then just ongoing maintenance becomes really important when you start digging into this. The other thing that I think is important about some of these numbers is it gets back to helmet use. Some people, you know, you'll hear arguments out there, well, if I get hit by a truck, having a helmet won't make much difference. And I wouldn't argue that, but I would point people back to the fact that if there were no motor vehicles at all, does it still make sense to use a helmet? If you look at the data, it's just an overwhelming yes, because those are the crashes where helmet's going to be the majority of the crashes, and they're also the kind of crash where the helmet is really going to help you a lot. So just a plug there for helmets as well as it relates to some of the crash data.
I'll also add that, you know, there's some communities that have found a significant number of their bicycle crashes are related to dooring, where someone opening the car door into the bike lane, the bicyclist hits that narrow edge, which at, you know, 10 to 12 miles per hour is a significant impact. Then they fly off their bike, hit the ground, and then if they happen to fall in a travel lane, then they might get hit by a moving motor vehicle. But it's not recorded in FAR's crash data unless it's a crash with a moving motor vehicle. So simply hitting a parked car, it doesn't necessarily get recorded the same way. So there's definitely some challenges to collecting crash data, and you know we've got it summarized here. You know, crashes are usually lower in volume and dispersed, so it makes a statistical analysis a little more difficult. We don't know about the near misses, and there might be a public perception that we can draw upon. Some communities have used, you know, internet resources to have people share their information on where they have near misses or where they have concerns about their safety. And here's just some examples from the city of Dallas where they have collected crash data, and they have sort of a heat map showing the information that they do have on bicycle and pedestrian crashes, where you can see where the density of their crashes is the greatest. And they also have point location data. So this is information that they can use to help inform their decision making. But there again, you know, making sure you know what the data shows, what's missing, and maybe if there's some other ways to obtain some useful information. In terms of tools to evaluate the safety or performance of our bike facilities, there's 5 here that we'll talk about briefly. The Highway Safety Manual, bicycle intersection safety indices, highway capacity manual, road safety audits, and then a tool called BikeSafe. For those of you who may not be familiar with the highway safety manual methodology, it's a fairly recent evolution in our evaluation tools for highways, where we come up with a safety performance function, which is a value representing the predicted number of crashes per year. And so you go through a calculation, you get your predicted number of crashes per year, and then you can apply crash modification factors that represent what the benefit or disbenefit may be from various countermeasures. So in this case, just as an illustration of how bike crashes are currently predicted with the methodology, you would go through the whole calculation to figure out the predicted number of crashes per year for an urban segment of a street or corridor. And then you apply this adjustment factor for bicycle crashes, and that tells you how many bike crashes are predicted for the year. And that bike crash adjustment factor is whether it's above 30 miles per hour or below 30 miles per hour, whether you have a 2-lane undivided, a 3-lane road, a 4-lane undivided, and so forth. And then those values range from 0.002 to 0.05. So it's simply a proportion of the predicted crashes for the corridor. So it's not going to tell you a lot about whether you had a bike facility or not, what was the quality of the bike facility in the number of crashes that are expected. Now, in terms of countermeasures related to bicycling, this is from the Crash Modification Factor Clearinghouse, and it's a website where you can look at thousands of crash modification factors, and these are some related to installing bicycle lanes. And it came from 2 different studies, one by Jensen and one by Chen. In the study by Jensen, he found that he had a crash modification factor of 1.05. So the prediction was that by adding a bike lane, you were increasing all types of crashes by 5%. In the study by Chen, the crash modification factor for all types of crashes was 0.94, or a reduction in crashes by 6%. So we've got different information, but here again, we don't have any information on what type of bike lane was added, did they treat the intersections well, and so forth. And then I'll point you to the 3rd line in this list for vehicle bicycle crashes. The Chen study found an increase to bicycle crashes of 50%. Now, this is certainly a cause for concern and cautious, but I don't want you to be unduly concerned. I want to put this in context for you. If you're only experiencing 1 bike crash per year, increasing it by 50% increases your bike crashes to 1.5 bike crashes per year. And it's not reflective of how many bicyclists are traveling on the road. It's not a bike crash rate. And there again, we want to think about what type of bike lanes are we adding? Did we do a good enough job? I know in New York City, when they've added some of their biking facilities, with the increased bike crashes that they saw, they went and modified some things and did some retrofits to further enhance the safety of their bicyclists on those facilities. Peter and Mike, do you want to add anything to this discussion of Highway Safety Manual?
One of the things that I want to talk about is when you're looking at the CMF, the crash modification factors, click on the references and to try to look at what the study was for, as Brooke had said. There's a lot more information that's available about studies. And one of the things that I've noticed is most of the areas where I've tried to look for a specific CMF, there's still a lot more research needed out there. There's a lot more that needs to be done, and hopefully there'll be more CMF numbers coming out.
Well, and there is new research that's just starting now to develop some safety performance functions for biking, as I understand it. So hopefully, while we might not have all the tools in the Highway Safety Manual we'd like to have, hopefully in time we'll have things that'll be able to tell us, what's the benefit of going from a 4-foot to a 5-foot lane, or what's the benefit of adding certain treatments at intersections. So stay tuned for future developments.
Yeah, this is Pete. I would just add is that I think we're going to see a lot of new insights and data coming as we get better exposure data. And I'm seeing some of that emerge within the context of Vision Zero. And some communities are really committed to it and are getting the data. And yeah, I think, yeah, stay tuned. We're going to learn a lot over the next 2 or 3 years.
I agree with that, Pete. This is Dan. I'd say there are some cities that are doing things at such a pace now and seeing the rates of bicycling at such a high level that we're going to start to have the data we need to make better determinations about the safety effects of these sorts of countermeasures. I'd just echo that and hope everybody can come back in a few years when we've got that data to share.
Mm-hmm.
Another tool I'd like to mention is it's an FHWA publication. It may be one of those best kept secrets, but it's been out there since about 2007, and it's the Bicycle Intersection Safety Indice, where you can use the formula in the publication to score each movement through an intersection, the left turn, the right turn, the through movements. And so this is something you could use on a project along a corridor to help you prioritize which locations you might add some additional enhancements for biking, or you might be looking at your overall biking network and prioritizing where you want to have projects in sort of a planning process. Some of the inputs that would go into this are very, very basic, pretty easy to collect. You've got your volume, your travel volume, the number of through lanes, how the intersection is configured in terms of lanes and auxiliary lanes, speed limits, whether you have parking or not, and whether you have a signal or not. So this is sort of data that an intern could be put to work through a summer starting to collect this information and incorporate it into an evaluation of your network. The Highway Capacity Manual has made great strides over recent years in terms of developing multimodal levels of service to address transit, pedestrians, bicyclists, as well as automobiles. And the first evolutions were maybe a bit clunky because they were still treating bicyclists as similar to how you would cars. Things like travel speed and intersection delay are certainly applicable to both, but there's other things like bicyclist perception that are going to influence the quality of a bike ride. So some of those factors that go into that bicyclist perception score should look very familiar. It's very much like those key safety factors we mentioned before: vehicle volume, heavy vehicles, number of lanes, the width of lanes, pavement condition, motor vehicle speed, and so forth. So this is another tool that I would highly recommend that you start incorporating into your evaluation process of your roadways, not thinking just about automobiles, but also bikes, peds, and transit.
Brooke, this is Dan. A few questions have come up on this, so I just wanted to see if I could cut in with the question now rather than waiting, and just ask if you and Mike and Pete can maybe have a bit of a discussion about contrasting the bicyclist level of service methodology here with your level of traffic stress that you presented earlier, and maybe when one or the other is appropriate or how they're related to one another. Be helpful for context.
I guess my first thought is level of traffic stress doesn't account for traffic volumes in it. So that might be a missing part of that level of traffic stress. You can make some correlations with, number of travel lanes and so forth, but that might be a missing piece where this gives you something a little more detailed. Level of service might be more appropriate when you're investing more in your analysis because you have an actual project, whereas level of traffic stress might be something that could be used in sort of a lower investment, looking at the whole network type process. What are your thoughts, Mike and Pete?
Yeah, I would agree with what you just said, and I would also point out that I think this is an area that's still evolving a little bit too. We've made great progress, and I think the tools we have there are just, light years ahead of what we had before. But I also think that especially in the sort of the level of stress, there's other models out there, and I think we're also going to see some, that area evolve over the next 3 years. So go back to our theme here of stay tuned a little bit too.
And just with the level of service for automobiles, I've had some experiences with people, the non-traffic engineers, not understanding the concept of level of service and not understanding that you always don't necessarily need to have a level of service A, and just having different ideas of what the numbers A, B, C, and D are supposed to mean. I think that I've had some agencies that had some difficulty, especially when working with the public, on talking about level of service.
Well, we've gotten very accustomed to, when we talk about level of service in our projects, to, target a specific level of service based on a peak hour for automobile traffic. But, that's a limited portion of our day, and striving to get a level of service B or C for automobiles means it might be a level of service F for bicyclists for the remainder of the day. And so we need to ask ourselves, who's the priority? Are we willing to allow for delay for one mode for a portion of the day to make the remainder of the day more comfortable for our other modes? Another process that I'd like to highlight that can be very applicable to biking or bicyclist safety is the road safety audit. And that's a multidisciplinary team that comes and looks at a project or a corridor independent of the people who are enmeshed in the project to provide some feedback and recommendations. Mike, you had some comments about including bicycling in road safety audits.
Right, and the slide really refers to a bicycle road safety audit, which in some cases there is a desire to have those, but all road safety audits should look at the bicycle facilities and conclude a concern about how are bicyclists supposed to get through this corridor or through this location. We have in the road safety, the audit team should include a human factors person, and preferably a human factors person who is experienced in bicycling and understands the concerns of not just motor vehicle operators, but bicycle operators too. So that every time you do an RSA, the bicycle issues should be a part of that, as well as pedestrian issues, not just motor vehicles.
This is Pete. I'm just going to put a plug in for RSAs as well. Been involved in a number of them, and in the bigger picture, they get pretty good results and really can reduce crashes on a corridor, and so it's something to consider.
And this is just an example from that prompt list that's in that guide. That provides a number of questions and some background information. So this is something that can be helpful to a team who's trying to make sure that they've addressed biking in the road safety audit. But it could also be helpful to a designer sitting in their office wanting to check themselves on their own work to see if they've fully addressed biking in their project.
Brooke, I'll cut in here with another question, an observation from some of our attendees, and this has been my experience as well. I think the idea of a bicycle road safety audit is a great one, and I wonder about what you see as the requirement to get people on bikes and actually ride a corridor during that audit as part of that, because I've participated in a few myself where that hasn't necessarily been part of it. It's been more looking at the facilities, and in certain cases, you may go out to the road and not see any bicyclists there, which sometimes can have the unintended effect of convincing people who may be on the fence about what they should be doing that, well, they're not here, so why should we be doing anything in the first place? I think actually getting on the bikes is a huge benefit, but I wonder how you sell that in a situation where maybe you've got some folks who are not going to do such a thing. Talk about that and maybe some ways to get around it.
Well, I don't know that I have any answers that would solve every problem, but I certainly, especially as part of these workshops that we do, we always try to arrange to have a bike ride wherever possible, because very often people designing these facilities may not have been on a bike for 10 or 20 years, or if they have been on a bike, it's been only in their neighborhood. They haven't been that commuter type biker who might take to a collector or arterial. And so I think there's a lot of value to putting yourselves on the pedals with the bicyclists who would be using that corridor, gaining their perspective. You know, we're all used to being walkers and drivers, and so I think we have a better empathy for that. But if we haven't been on a bike for a considerable amount of time, we lose touch with the fact that anytime you have to come to a stop sign, it's uncomfortable. And anytime you come to a busy intersection, you're having to do a number of things at once. Meanwhile, you're having to control your bike, which is different than controlling a car. And things like fatigue, while our factors are for drivers, it's a different type of factor for a bicyclist. And so I think there's a lot of value to doing that, particularly if the people working on a project are very far removed from biking themselves. Just getting them on a bike to help experience that is a great benefit.
This is Mike. While I agree that that bicycling should be a part of a bike road safety audit, there are some road safety audits are being done on a planned design or some planned improvements to an area that you don't have the ability to do that. And again, it's really valuable to have engineers or others that are involved in the RSA that are experienced bicyclists, even when not doing a bicycle-specific one. So road safety audits are not just on existing facilities, they are planned improvements for facilities.
So it may be even possible that if you can't bike on a planned facility, bike on a facility that would be similar to what you're planning to get kind of a sense of what that might be for people who don't bike regularly.
That's correct.
Moving on, I'll mention this. This is also part of that document, is this bikeability checklist, which is something that you could use to elicit public comments and help people frame their responses on their biking experience along a corridor. So maybe getting some input from the people who are actually using the facility or live or could potentially use the facility for biking and what their perceptions are of it. Selecting countermeasures, we have a number of design guides available to us. And I will mention that FHWA published a memorandum back in 2013 because there's a lot of questions about what we would and would not allow. And we just highlighted the fact that we do support taking a flexible approach. We do recognize the need for balancing the needs of all users. And so sometimes, you know, you'll make a compromise for one mode of travel to benefit another. And then we recommended certainly the AASHTO guide for development of bicycle facilities, but also ITE's designing for walkable urban thoroughfares is another resource, and NACTO's urban bikeway design guide. Both the ITE manual and the NACTO manual are free and available online as resources. And then more recently, FHWA has been publishing some additional guidance. Because the AASHTO guideline doesn't address separated bike lanes or what is sometimes known as a cycle track, and there's been a lot of interest in those, we published this separated bike lanes planning and design guide that has a lot of information. And more recently, we've published some documents achieving multimodal networks, applying flexibility and reducing conflicts. And then just this year, we've taken that information and sort of translated it to a small town rural setting in the small town and rural multimodal networks. I'll also mention there's another publication that's out there. Massachusetts Department of Transportation has developed their own separated bike lanes guide, which builds on what we already have. Peter, you were heavily involved with that. Would you like to say something about that guide?
The multimodal one?
The separated bike lanes guide from
MassDOT. Sure. Yeah, in fact, I would comment on both of them. I think what's really great about the separated bike lane guide is that it gives you permission to do a lot of things. And I think, again, going back to where we started at the beginning of the webinar, it's like, you know, things are changing fairly quickly, what's in, what's out. And I would look at this as a really good interim step. Moving toward the 2018 new Bike AASHTO guide, and so you know, this is a great place to start right now if you want to move forward and not have to wait. I would also just add a plug for the Achieving Multimodal Networks. What I really like about this, again, is it gets back to the word permission. I found in general there's a lot of mythology out there about what you can do, what you can't do, where there's flexibility, where there isn't. And this manual really looks at what are the barriers to putting in bike facilities, and what's the real story behind how much flexibility you have in addressing those barriers. And so yeah, a really good manual.
Thanks, Peter.
I want to add too that sometimes the barrier to some of the things that where people will say they can't do this is based on a traffic engineer who may have retired 15 or 20 years ago, and it was just their own personal opinion and not a real barrier or something in a design manual.
That's very true. Or sometimes we have something in our design manual that we don't remember the reason for it anymore. And there's one example I can think of from Texas where they have wider outside lanes in urban areas, and that was a first attempt to make sure they were accommodating bikes on all corridors. But now they're in a situation where people have been resistant to narrow that wide outside lane to provide a bike lane that would be even better, because they didn't understand where that wide outside lane came from to begin with. Another resource I'll point you to is a website, pedbikesafe.org, and the bicycle component of this is similar to the pedestrian component, where there's guidance, background information, case studies, and some tools to help select countermeasures and a list of a number of countermeasures that can improve conditions for bicyclists. We also get lots of questions about, are these bicycle treatments that we see in all of these guides, like NACTO in particular, acceptable when you are looking at the Manual of Uniform Traffic Control Devices? And FHWA has developed this website to address that very question. The easiest way to get to it, if you want to find this, and we'll provide references afterwards, but I always just Google MUTCD bikes and it gets me here pretty easily. And so on the left column you see a number of treatments that are experimentation, that we've approved for experimentation, where we ask a community to work with us and take some before and after data to help us know if this is really working or not. So we've got things like two-stage turn boxes or green markings used with shared lane markings. And then we have a number of features that we've given interim approval for. Of course, with that, we're still asking that agencies collect some nominal before and after data to help us make sure that this is working, so that eventually it can make it into the next edition of the MUTCD. Things like the bicycle box and green colored pavement. And then finally, on the right column, you see that we have a number of interpretations to help clarify what's already in the MUTCD and the correct usage of the traffic control devices we already have. Mike, you had some things to add about.
Yeah, I sit on the Bike Technical Committee that provides advice to the National Committee on Uniform Traffic Control Devices, and there is a big concern that a lot of experiments are not being completed, or a lot of agencies are doing experiments without going through the formal request in the manual on how to do an experiment, getting permission from the Federal Highway Administration. One of the main reasons for doing that is so that there can be some oversight, and then there could be a sharing of the results. The biggest issue is a lot of experiments have begun, but then we never hear anything about them. And it would really help other agencies and major consideration for approving a certain treatment or device in the next manual that comes out. And I would just urge all agencies that are having experiments to please turn in the results, or turn in some kind of an evaluation, so that it can be shared with others and can have beneficial use for future developments of either an interim approval or the next manual on uniform traffic control devices.
And this is not meant to be an onerous or difficult process. The information that we're asking that you collect is fairly nominal. We just want to make sure that we're collecting the collective body of knowledge so that we can improve conditions for everyone. And with that, I'd just like to, make a summary thought. Years ago, I read a book called Skunk Works about Lockheed Martin and their development of some very innovative planes. And then more recently, I read a book about the construction of the Brooklyn Bridge. And as I was reading both of those books, I thought, what I'm doing as a civil engineer is really engineering light. I'm not innovating or developing new technologies to create better conditions. I'm pulling things out of a table and using known guidance. Well, I don't feel the same way anymore. With all of the tools that are emerging and all of the things that we're trying to accomplish, especially in terms of providing safe bicycle facilities, we're really at an innovative stage, and we have an opportunity to do more than just engineering light. We get to try things out and evaluate and improve the body of knowledge for everyone. So I'd encourage you, just because it's new or it's not published in a book, don't be afraid to use good engineering judgment, plan for the safety of your bicyclists on a well-connected network. Mike and Peter, would you like to make any comments?
I would just ditto what you said, and yeah, it's a very exciting time, and I just need to compliment you and FHWA for the leadership in the last 3 or 4 years too, because it's been really good. We have permission to do so many things now. We're getting more permission, and it's really opening up a whole new world. So it's been really good.
And I just want to say that a lot of the changes that I'm seeing that are coming in for consideration, some of the interim approvals that have been issued recently relate to bicyclists and bicyclist facilities. There seems to be a lot of things that are going on in this area. So there's a lot to come out in the near future and with the next manual.
Dan, would you like to take it over from here?
Yeah, I think it's probably been apparent that I kind of tried to cut in with some of the questions we were getting throughout. I kind of had a feeling we weren't going to make it for our final 30-minute long Q&A. So I hope I summarized and asked a lot of the questions that were sort of burning. I know I didn't get to all of them, and in some cases, the reason for that was that people were asking about very particular design issues that I believe we're going to begin addressing in parts 2 and 3. So I'll tease that, and hopefully everybody can stay tuned and come back to us to see those webinars. I did want to spend just a minute at the very end here asking a question that came up a lot, and we didn't touch on it as much here, but the typical discussion, we get into bicycle safety design, and we particularly look at innovative treatments and innovative things like separated bike lanes. I think some of our friends in rural locations often feel a bit left out by these discussions. The solutions that we're talking about are not necessarily relevant for all of the contexts in which rural communities are working with respect to the same sort of limitations on folks not really having access to motor vehicles. They're much more limited with their network, not as many connecting roads and alternate routes. So they're trying to find ways to pull these bike facilities into already limited right-of-ways and often looking at just one corridor. And so I want to ask just generally if you all have thoughts about how to think about these things in the context of a rural setting and where there are maybe other opportunities in rural locations that aren't necessarily available in more densely populated urban areas. So does anybody want to take a crack at that?
Yeah, this is Pete. Obviously the new guidance that just came out for rural areas is really good. When I work in rural areas, one of the things I notice is sometimes a lack of attention to intersections and just crossings or high-speed right turn lanes that sort of appear may not be well marked. I think there's a lot of things related to taking the same design principles and thinking through them at intersections and at least being purposeful about them and predictable and having clarity of movement. There's just a few basic things. I have a slide I use sometimes called "Paint is your friend," and to the extent that you can create that clarity of movement and predictability at intersections, I think you go a long way. And then I also need to make a plug for I guess 2 other things. One is for shoulders. It benefits all modes. Reduces crashes involving motor vehicles and reduces obviously bike and ped crashes, and it also just good for maintenance, increases the life cycle of your facility. And then the last one would be when you enter and leave small towns. I think quite often you come into a town or you're coming out of a town, and the whole character changes very quickly. And sometimes when you go into a town, you can often find yourself in a situation that there's lack of continuity in terms of the network, and all of a sudden you feel like, whoa, this is not a road I'm comfortable on, whereas maybe in the country area I was. And so really looking at those transitions and maybe even some spot signing to go on a more comfortable street through the town if you don't, something like that. But those transitions I would also really focus on.
Great. Thank you very, very much for that, Pete. I can't agree more, and I think that there's opportunity as we move through parts 2 and 3 of this series to integrate not only what can work in an urban setting and in even a suburban setting, but where we can see opportunities for improvements in rural areas as well. And I think you can apply those same, like you said, principles in multiple settings. I have to cut it off there, unfortunately. We're at the end of our period, but I do want to thank Brooke and Mike and Pete for sharing all that information with us. I think it was a really valuable discussion, and all of your participation in the chat and sending in your questions. That was very just really great to see all the interest in this topic. We'll continue it with parts 2 and 3. I hope you'll consider registering for those. I want to mention to everyone that as you exit the webinar today, you'll be greeted by a brief survey. We would appreciate your feedback and any thoughts you have on the webinar we present today and some of the material. And then finally, thanks again just to Brooke Struve, Mike Senecki, and Peter Lagerway for today's presentations. And thanks to all of you for attending the webinar. We'll see you back here for part 2 on April 17th. Thank you very much.